script I have to read. It's in my other book, so I'll be back in about 30 seconds.
Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Dave. How are you?
Good, good. Nice to see you. It's been a while.
It has. Gosh, I missed those weekly meetings.
Weekly, weren't they daily?
Hey,
I suspect for you they probably were, but I thank you for that graduate course in public school funding. My heavens.
Okay, we'll get into our introductions and everything in a second here. Let me go through the chairman's script, which we're required to read here for all meetings in the House. And so I'll go through this quickly and then we'll introduce ourselves and get on with today's meeting. As chair of the House Education Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a subcommittee, a working group of the Education Committee. No votes will be taken, of course, during this meeting. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that all members of the committee, subcommittee, and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting by the Zoom platform or by the telephone. All necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the General Court website. The notice for this meeting complies with House rules and RSA 91-A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@leg.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. I want to introduce the staff that's assisting us today, and that's Jennifer Forr. She's our committee researcher. There will be no votes taken at this meeting. As I said earlier, let's start the meeting, and we'll just take a roll call of the subcommittee members so we know who is here. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. So we'll go through the subcommittee. I'll call the members right now, the roll call. Obviously, I'm here, I'm speaking. Representative Moffett.
Yes, I'm here alone in Loudon.
Representative Ford, Oliver Ford.
Home alone in Chester, in my office.
Thank you very much. Representative Myler.
Home in my Kentucky office alone.
Representative Luno.
Reporting from Hopkinton with Ozzie the long-haired dachshund.
Oh, he's always there with you, isn't he? Representative Ellison.
I'm home alone here in Concord.
Okay, thank you. That is the 6 members on our committee. What I'd like to do is take an opportunity. We have a number of participants participating today that are invites to our committee here. I see Chancellor Provencher. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Catherine Provencher. I'm serving as Chief Administrative Officer of the university system, and thanks very much for the invite and glad to be with you this morning.
Thank you. And I see Joe Moran. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Chairman Ladd. I'm Joe Marone. I'm chair of the USNH board, and like Kathy, very much appreciate the chance to talk to you and very much appreciate the fact that you guys are squeezing in the time to actually discuss these issues.
Thank you. And I also see Don Burks out of PSU. Don, welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks. Don Burks, president of Plymouth State University.
Thank you. And is Susan Hewitt here yet? Or
Yes, she's here.
Yes,
right in the middle of my screen. Hi, Susan.
I'm in the middle of your Brady Bunch. Good morning, all. I'm Susan Hewitt. I'm the interim chancellor of the community college system. I'm home in Hooksett, and hopefully the cat will stay out.
And I also know that I see Representative Likas there. She's on the Education Committee, and Representative Deb Hobson. She's also on the Legislative Committee. So today's docket, what we have here is we're looking at the HB2 and the merger information that's within HB2. And we have invited today Dr. Don Burks. He is president of Plymouth State University, and he has a wonderful history, I believe, of out in Bay Run. That's Penn State, Erie. And I believe Don was a chancellor there. Maybe that's another name for president of the college. However, Don is very knowledgeable in this area. We also have Susan Hewitt here. Susan is from the community college system, as she mentioned, and also the interim chancellor of the community college system. And following Don and Susan, we will then have Catherine Preventure. I've known Catherine for a number of years when she was treasurer of the state here, and that was very important to all of us. And now she is interim chancellor for the system, and welcome. And Joe Moran, I've had the pleasure of working with you as a part-time trustee when I took the spot of our speaker, and I really enjoyed that opportunity. So going into where we are today, Don, could you please start with a presentation regarding, you sent us a short, well, we actually got from Chancellor Preventure, a sheet identifies some of the issues, both sides of the coin here in terms of what a merger might mean for our university system. So could you please go ahead and present?
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk for a few minutes. And I think all of you have a copy of what Kathy sent, at least I hope so. But I'm going to go through some of the high points just because over the years I've been in 4 different educational systems, and I've gotten to see a lot of different pieces of that. Also studied some because I often went to other campus systems to look at how they were working and functioning because of some of the jobs I had in academia. But before that, I was in industry for about 14, 15 years, actually a few more than that. So got to see a little bit of both sides and how things work together for the benefits of the states and the system. Particularly, I focused a lot of time on how systems can work on economic development and support of the states in which they're a part. In fact, starting out in New Mexico State, really looked at how and what you could do as a university to make a difference in the future of the state and the directions it goes. I put together this kind of list of 2 parts. Really, I think there's 2 sides of the coin here. One looking at what the benefits and potential benefits are, and the other side is looking at some of the challenges when you do sort of a consolidation like this. So each one of these items that I have down here has a story, and I don't have time to tell all the stories that are associated by that, but I just want to hit some highlights of it. That
Are you still with us, Don?
Yeah. Did I lose you?
Don, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me all right?
I think it's on your, I think it may be on your end, Rick.
Yeah, we can hear Brooks fine.
Okay, can you never tell sometimes with these things. Okay, so
Rick might,
I'll keep going then. And
you may want to wait a minute till
okay,
Chairman Ladd comes back. There he is.
There you go. Are you back, Rick?
oops, lost you again.
You're muted, Rick.
Muted.
There you go. All right, we're good.
All good? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start with some of what I've seen over the course of time as the benefits of an integrated system and how it might play a role here in New Hampshire. One of the things I've liked in other systems that I've seen is when they have an integrated structure, they're better able to have representation that's coherent and strategic throughout the state. Each of the campuses sort of is an outlet for their communities in which they're a part. And there's also the opportunities of what we used to call in Texas MITSEs, where campuses get together and provide smaller outlets to regions that normally wouldn't have an educational presence. So one of the things I like about an integrated system is a strategic view and having touch points across the state to address the needs of different regions, but be able to pull on and draw the resources of a whole system. So that's one thing I've seen that works pretty well. Also, there's an aspect of a unified system that the governor and the legislature can work with. And I say this from the fact that several of the states I've been a part of, the universities have been a key part in the strategic direction and setting the strategic direction for the state as a whole. And sort of a tripart arrangement where the government, the state, the legislature, the local industries, and academia get together to map out a strategic plan and strategy to move the state forward. And putting together in a single group like that provides a good way for legislatures and governors and the various entities to interact and have a sort of strategic statewide goal and presence. I think also one thing I found is when there's a unified system, you're better able to deal with some of the cross-cutting needs that businesses have. Often, businesses will have to draw on and need resources from not just the local campus, but different elements of the system as a whole. And it's really helpful when they can work and coordinate as a whole in a way that allows the system to put together the capabilities that are needed for a given region for a project or idea that they're working on. So it's sort of a unified approach to this. We looked at this in New Mexico because the land grant institution, which I was a part of, had outlets all through the state. And so we worked really to how to be able to address the needs of the individual outlets and be able to take the resources of the system as a whole and apply them to the problems and challenges throughout the state. And I think it really brings the sort of educational strengths to a region. I found this also in Texas, where Texas A&M had what was the equivalent of a what you call usually the ag service station or ag station. They had an engineering one, and what they did was they were able to support businesses throughout the state and economic development that went on those regions. So having a system, kind of unified system like that, gives you the ability to do some of these things that are tougher to do as individual elements and pieces. I've also found that it strengthens the academic pathways that students have from an associate level all the way through to PhD. Students find at different times in their lives they need different bits of education, and having a way where that's a coordinated approach where they can take classes in one place and build on those educational elements, stackable, so to speak, throughout a whole range to a BS, to an MS, to a PhD, if needed, or even in elements less than that, enables them to sort of tailor their education throughout their lifetime to their needs as they grow as an individual and with their business opportunities they have. I think it also provides greater affordability. And I think the way it does that is it provides a pathway for students through 2-year institutions to 4-year institutions, and where they can afford to live locally, get an education that's more economically balanced for the first couple of years, but also be able to, because of the system sort of approach, be able to take courses in those areas that lead them to get a BS or an MS or PhD degree. One thing that I think is critical also is there's better branding opportunities when you have a unified system. We're in competition with all the states around us. Oftentimes the costs are less. A lot of our students leave to get education elsewhere. A lot of our graduates leave to get jobs elsewhere. One of the things about enabling a system as a whole to have a brand allows you to compete more effectively, to keep your students that are in the state, because you can actually tie together the elements of it and actually project to your population what the capabilities are and the opportunities within your own sort of system. If we're disjointed, it's sometimes hard to be able to do that in a unified way. And I think one of the things that we could really use in New Hampshire is this kind of informed perspective on what the system as a whole is to allow us to compete effectively with out-of-state systems. I always think that what I've seen is if you do it right, and if you make the combined system what it can be, there's really the ability to eliminate the competitiveness within a system and actually use it to specialize the tasks and the skills that are needed in various areas throughout the state. So it allows you to complement those skills rather than competing with them. And I found that oftentimes if it's not, when you don't have an organized system like that, their tendency is to sort of create redundancies throughout the system, whether it be in back office operations or in the actual operations that the educational offerings that are had. We're working on some of that now at a system level, and I think what's happened in this last year really makes this view much more possible, is because many of our classrooms now are put together so that we have video links so that we can do remote education very easily. So places that are more remote that may have been not very strong in the amount of education they could get, now with this combined sort of system view with the automation that's occurred, allows you to target and put at each location, I think, capabilities that would be needed by the students in those areas. Let me see some of the other things I wanted to bring up. There's some aspects that I kind of like, and I've watched at other places I've been, and that is, and particularly I found this in Texas when I was at the University of Houston system, is the ability of the flagship to concentrate more on graduate and PhD programs, but also on business innovation and R&D. And then working with the other campuses around the state, that ability to sort of mix that capability to provide the sort of business support that's needed at all different levels, and also provide the student capability to address the business needs that are in various locations. I think there's the ability to better track student progress and leveraging of support. Before Ross left, we were working together on developing a common pathway approach in both the community colleges and the university system. And I think the potential of that to assure students when they come in that they've got a seamless pathway from beginning wherever they are to completing their degree in any of the locations around the state really provide a lot of benefits. I think there are benefits to the community colleges in this way, but also in the four-year institutions, because there's a sense of a relationship that in which the value of both community college activities and the sometimes less applied work that's done at universities can see that every group can see the advantages of both approaches, and it brings reality to both sides of the issue. It provides pathways for students to grow and learn, but it also provides and pulls, I think, the campuses that are four-year institutions more into the world of saying, here are the needs of the state and the region. How do we address and marry those two together? Because I think there's a sort of a communication link that comes through both the community colleges and the research and development activities that really, and it's something I've worked on for years in trying to build as the research vice president at universities, this sort of pathway from this innovation and idea concept all the way to implementation. And that's why we built the clusters at Plymouth State, was to really build in this concept that there's real need for the educational elements that have to do with innovation and research, but there also needs to be the application of those skill sets. So I think bringing those pieces together is really helpful. I know the missions are slightly different, but I also think there's a lot of benefit that both community colleges and universities get from the integration with each other on those aspects. I also think if it's done well and right, it leads to partnerships and innovations in regions across the state, because there's just that awareness and involvement throughout the state. And so there's that exchange going on constantly between different locations of the state. Many of you know the North Country, from our perspective, has some real challenges ahead. And I think the ability to, and we've been working with White Mountain, the ability, I think, to really be able to address the problems and needs of a region, as well as the educational needs, I think offers a lot to as we go forward in the future. And the opportunity increase for partnerships and co-location of activities. And I think on the larger scale, I have really enjoyed and liked in previous states that I've been a part of the interaction between the university systems and the state on their strategic goals of what they're trying to accomplish. And I think working together as a team like that and developing the partnerships are stronger when you've got a unified way to look at it. I think on the other side of it, you've heard a lot of issues about, and I just was reading something about the various past trustees wrote, and they're all right. I mean, there are challenges with this. I think it would require the legislature to be probably more engaged with the actual activities that are going on in the university system as a whole. But I look at that as a positive from a partnership side. So I think if we don't do it right, and I've seen it not done right, I've seen community colleges be relegated to some part that doesn't really get the attention it's needed. I've also seen another approach like at Penn State, where essentially Penn State was a mixture of a really well-known research institution with a huge research budget and with many graduate programs, mixed with campuses all throughout the state that originally started as 1-year and 2-year campuses, and many of them went on to become 4-year institutions. But the strength of having the backbone of the main campus with the campuses that were around the state, I was particularly at Penn State Barron, allowed us to do development and opportunities that we would have never had otherwise. We developed a whole engineering program. It became very popular. We took a research park. We had 120 acres. We worked with the Maine University system to set that up. We acquired the property. We started working with companies. By the time I had left, it was financially beneficial to the university, but the research park was completely full of companies that were working in there, developing new ideas for the region. So I think the models where I've seen it work, they take a lot of the items that you could not afford to do individually at the campuses and combining them with the strengths of having a strong sort of central capability at the flagship university makes it so that we in essence had a lot of strength. And we could have gone as Penn State Barron, we grew to the point where we could have been a standalone campus and not been a part of the system. And I'll admit there's the downside of it is you can feel like you don't have as much of a say in what you're doing. But on the other side of it is when you have something you want to do, you've got the background and support of the entire system in what you're trying to do. And so I was able to build a building towards the end there that was unique through a lot of industry, universities, at least our size. I was able to build a building that had offices and suites for businesses at the same time it had classrooms right beside them for education. And so it sort of bridged that world between the research park we had built with the community needs and the educational needs and the specific research needs. And companies from all over the world came and joined that. So I think there are downsides to it if we're not careful. I think we need to always watch that each mission is being addressed, and I think that's kind of stated in the end there. I think it's easy sometimes to, and it's even easy to do that within the system as it exists today. It's easy to sort of put too much emphasis on the flagship and not enough on the individual campuses. But I think the partnership with the legislature can be really positive. I mean, you're not really giving away everything. You've got control over everything in a way by the way you fund things. And I think there are options within that of how you do that to make sure that the resources are getting where you need them to be, and we're doing strategically what is most useful for the university as a whole. It can become a bureaucracy. Penn State became that. And they had to reevaluate about, say, 3 or 4 years ago. They went through and re-looked at everything they were doing to be able to streamline their operations. But I think when you look at it, I'll look at 2 systems that are comparable in Pennsylvania. One's the Passy system, which essentially is a state system. A lot of people don't realize Penn State's actually the largest private university in the country. And what the Passy system did was had independent branches throughout the state that were linked together with the central system head. And they functioned pretty much autonomously. Over that time, Penn State, with their one university concept, which was a united system that we're talking about here, had 2-year, 1-year, and 4-year institutions all throughout the state linked together as one system. And if you look at it now, you've got Penn State, some very successful campuses across the state, helping in so many different areas the development of Pennsylvania, largely supported now by the legislature because they see the value of the components that are in those various parts of the state. But you've got the Passy system, which was state funded and supported, and it's now looking at how it's going to consolidate the individual groups of campuses for their future survival. And if I think sometimes if they had address the issue earlier of how they work together as a system in a whole, they would have been a competitor to Penn State rather than a tremendous laggard within the state now, where they're discussing what they can actually offer anymore. So I think there's just sort of this looking ahead. Certainly higher ed is in a crisis phase right now across the country. But it's been those that have looked ahead to what the future brings before it happens. Like the Passy system waited too long and suffered in that realm. Whereas Penn State, which actually has a 2-year community college as a part of it, that's working very well, unified and built a backbone and back office systems that supported each of the campuses well and allowed the systems and the campuses to really be strong partners with their community in a way that they could draw on resources and capabilities throughout the Penn State system. So I think I've said enough, but I just wanted to hit some highlights. As I said, there's stories that go with each of the points that I brought down. I personally am not either pro or against the consolidation, but I thought when I always like to see the benefits of both sides of the coin. And personally, in the situation we are in now, I see that there are some real benefits as we go forward in doing the consolidation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burks. I have some questions, but I'm going to hold my questions back, and I'll probably call you up on the phone and ask you a little bit about the Commonwealth system and Penn State being within that system, which involves Temple University and Pitt and Lincoln. But within the Penn State, I'm really interested in knowing how they resolve the issue of credit transfers that traditionally in our system have been approved by the program or the department, and how you were able to arrive at a course 101 at your Penn State major campus there, and then where you were out in Erie, the same credit course, it met the same standards, et cetera, and was accepted from one of the 20-odd Penn State locations. So I'd like to talk to you about that a little later. I'll open this up to a few other questions that might come, and then we're going to move right into Susan Hewitt.
Yeah.
Yes, Representative Ellison.
Thank you, Don, for the presentation. I have one which has been on the forefront of my mind since we started this. Would you have a sense of what the time frame is to try to put the systems together, given the complicated issues that we're all dealing with?
That's a good question. I will tell you this, there's two ways to do this, and I've seen this in the Pennsylvania system, which I think Representative Ladd brought up pretty well. One, the Pennsylvania PASSI system studied it for years and was unable to really come to any agreement before it was too late. And so they found themselves in kind of a bad situation. I think you do it in phases, in steps. I think the step of making a board that's really working on, and if there's one thing I would do maybe in doing this, I think the time frame of putting together a board makes sense as soon as possible. In fact, I think there should be a group of individuals from both of the campuses working together to sort of map this out and map how this works. I think I would, if you didn't call it a board, you definitely put a group of people together that were interested and knowledgeable about education and could be a part of it. So I think the track you're on makes sense. I don't think you're moving ahead of the time frame that it takes to really study this and do it right, but I think you're launching it. And I think launching it is very important because the PASSI system played with it for too long and therefore lost the aspect of being able to do it. I think just a quick answer to Rick Ladd's question, because I think it's a really good one. And it's one I'm working on with the University of Maine now, is how you do accreditation across the whole system. And that is the beauty of the Penn State system is you enter any campus and it's just like you're in any campus. In other words, everything translates right on through. The graduation rate of students and many students would start at an individual campus and plan on going to the main campus and would end up staying at the individual campus because they really got grounded and got the education they wanted. But any student who wanted to transfer was automatically admitted to the other, the Penn State main campus. In other words, you got into one, you got into another. Now, you may not be able to succeed, but 87% of those that did that graduated that came from the individual campuses. So it had a graduation rate that wasn't a whole lot different than it was for those that had gone up through the main campus.
Thank you.
You're muted, Rick.
Yeah, we'll go with Representative Moffett with a question, but I'd like to also, hold back for some of our questions to the latter part so that we could get Susan Hewitt in. And I'd like to hear from Catherine Provencher and Joe Moran as well here. So go ahead, Representative Moffett.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Dr. Burks. Real quick, I spent many years in the university system, mostly at Plymouth, and I also spent over 20 years in the CCSNH system. So I spent a lot of time in both systems. A difference currently between the systems, but you mentioned funding. CCSNH has been essentially a state agency where the legislature could see the line items. USNH, a little bit different, more autonomy there. There's so many pieces to this, but let me just ask you one question. As you see this moving forward in some fashion, again, the CCSNH folks, of which I was one, were and are essentially state employees. The USNH folks, as I mentioned, have a little more autonomy. So if or however this merger comes about, if or when, do you see everyone in this merged situation as being a state employee on the CCSNH model, or having more autonomy and separation as per the USNH model?
I think that's a determination that the legislature can make. I found, interestingly, when I was at Penn State, that there were individuals in different plans. So although there was one system, it had a variety of approaches that it used for how it did things. So I think that's something to be discussed and worked on as things move forward. I think there are benefits to making the system as coherently united as possible, but I think there is room for flexibility, as I've seen in other systems. So, I mean, when I was at New Mexico State, it was essentially a different system. The community colleges were, but they were still a part of the system as a whole and still part strategically of what we were trying to do. So I think you've got some flexibility on that line.
That's a good question, and perhaps when we get to some of the other speakers, they can also address it. Representative Meyer, last one, and then we're going to go to Dr. Hewitt.
Just briefly, Dr. Epps, the question I have is a management question. Currently, we have in our system, as I understand it, each president of the college reports directly to the Board of Trustees of the university system, with a fairly weak chancellor system. In your experience, what has been the management structure in some of the successful systems that you've been in as it relates to presidents of colleges versus a stronger CEO from a chancellor perspective?
I've seen every mixture of that, if you want to know. I personally like the one where the presidents report directly to the board, but I know there's a lot that think that should be report directly to a CEO. So I have seen it work where when I was at University of Houston, the presidents did report to the CEO, but each of the campuses was given a lot of autonomy by the legislature. So they got separate line item funding and everything like that. So it was kind of a mixed mode. I was saw at Penn State where the campuses were really aggregated under a certain campus office, but which you had direct access to the board and also to the president. So there's so many different ways to make it work. I know Joe's got a particular feeling about what it should be, and we're kind of look at it a little bit differently that way, but it works both ways. It just has to be done in a way that really allows you to share the strategy as a whole across the system and be able to allocate the resources and the particularly back office consolidation operations that you need to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is a real important issue, and it's some of us. I guess I'm a person that believes a little bit differently that you need a strong CEO managing where you're going, and I think that the buck has to stop somewhere. But I'd like now, if we can,
Rick,
Dave,
just a really quick, specific question.
Make it quick, Dave.
No, we'll do, Rick. Thanks. Don, thanks very much for your time this morning. You had mentioned that that Plymouth State is doing some partnerships with or working together with White Mountain Community College. And I was just wondering what sort of challenges or difficulties you've run into with that couldn't be resolved by, working things out with Chuck, but might be able to be remedied through a merger.
Yeah, I'll tell you, first of all, Chuck's been great to work with, and we both want the same thing. I think where we get into an issue is there's no framework really to do the type of integration that we want to do. We're certainly sharing back and forth on things, but Chuck and I have talked about how much further we could go in this if we had a closer association with each other. Particularly one of the things that you need to resolve are the different faculties in the group and the different ways that those faculties interact with each other. Having a unified approach allows you to think as a whole. And I think you run into even things you don't even realize you run into as separate systems that inhibit the movement of things you really want to do. So even though you have a president or two presidents that really want to actually work extremely tightly together, it seems like the issues are just hard when you're not one coherent system. It's just the way it works.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burks. I think we're going to transition now into the community college system with Dr. Hewitt. Welcome, and go for it.
Thank you very much, Representative Ladd. Just a little bit about my background. I've taught from grade 6 through graduate school. I've been part of the SUNY system, the Connecticut Community College system, and for 11 years now here in New Hampshire, first as president. And then I thought I retired, and I'm learning the New Hampshire way is that one doesn't really retire. So when Dr. Gattell went off to Bryant University, I've stepped in until the end of June. So a number of comments for you. I really appreciate Dr. Burks's remarks and agree with quite a bit of what he had to say. And I appreciated his underscoring the need to value the voice of the community colleges. And I know that our system has shared information about mergers with you. And that's the first place where community colleges experience a problem, is that in short order, our voice is diminished or altogether out. So when you ask the question of what are the policy issues here, for me, that's the initial challenge for the legislature and frankly, for the new board that will be created. It's one thing to say we're going to take 5 members from the community college board, 5 members from the university board, 5 independents, and 8 ex officios already from that arrangement. Some of you have community college experience and you realize what happens on our campuses is different. And again, Dr. Burks acknowledged that there is a difference in the missions, and how we fulfill those missions is slightly different too. So the whole notion of how are we going to prepare for this? I don't object at all to the notion of one board and unifying the systems, but there are different ways of unifying the systems. We can look at what just happened in Vermont, where the Community College of Vermont is sitting along with the 4-year colleges, but it still remains its own entity, in part because it's organized differently than the university system. And I would make that comment about the organization that we have in our state. The 7 community colleges do each have a president, but they report up to a chancellor, to a CEO, if you will. And much of what happens in the system has been organized in such a way to be efficient. So there's one instance of the student management system. We use Banner currently. 8 years ago, there were 7 instances. And so even having students move within our own system was difficult. Well, we have, fixed that. And I raised that system as an example of pieces that will have to be dealt with. And I really encourage some thoughtful planning. I again agree with Dr. Burks. I have looked at what happens in systems where actions are taken and insufficient planning is underway. I think you can do both simultaneously. I describe myself as a refugee from Connecticut because when I came in 2010, the whole merger idea was beginning. And here we are 11 years later, and it still is not any place near being complete. One of my side jobs is I'm a commissioner for NECHI. I know you're going to hear from Barbara Brittingham, the recently retired president of our regional accrediting organization. But I will say that what has happened in Connecticut is a great display of a lack of planning. There's some wonderful ideas, and there's been very little activity that involves all of the parties that need to be involved. When we talk about becoming one system, if what we're ultimately going to do is go for one accreditation, there are lots of pieces to that, beginning with mission. So as you think about this as legislators, please think about who's on that board, how that board operates, and how it is that the missions of both entities are sustained. And I'm going to get into some gory details on academics. So I'm going to think about, you put the two entities, the university system and the community college system together. Okay. So by accreditation, it's the faculty that has responsibility for the curriculum. Well, who's going to make different decisions? I'll give you an example that still stays with me probably 5 years after it happened. There was a young man who graduated from Manchester Community College. He graduated when he was 40. And he had a real interest in going into research. And I've no doubt at some point he will earn a PhD because he's gifted and a really talented student. He wanted to go back to the University of New Hampshire, and I'm not picking on the university. And we were all surprised to learn that because he had a less than stellar experience academic experience, I'll say, when he was at UNH when he was 18, and by his own definition, stupid and majoring in alcohol, he ended up on academic probation. So now here he is at 40. He's a dad, he has 2 kids, he knows what he wants, and he wants to go back to the university. There's no academic amnesty program. So had that man gone back to the university, he would have gone from having the 4.0 he had in the community college system to the 0.6 academic GPA he had more than 20 years earlier. And I only point that out because there's a difference in the mission of our two systems. We are, the college is a second, third, and fourth chances, and we have what are called academic amnesty programs. So frankly, if you screw up, but then you decide you want to come back and you have a direction and so on, there's an opportunity for you. Well, as our unified system moves on, I want those opportunities to exist. If we look at what happened at the University of Alaska system, as time went on, there were fewer community college students. And why was that? Well, first, because the tuition became less affordable. But secondly, because of how, as you try to unify systems and policies, those of us who deal with, I'll use the statistical term, outliers, our situations are not the majority situations, and therefore they're not necessarily thought about. I think everybody's entering into this with good faith and good intentions, but how this will play out will be a matter of the kinds of planning and the people who are involved in the planning. Let's talk about admissions for a minute, because as the governor talks about it, he wants to see people admitted and then able to move within the system. The community colleges are open admission. So sometimes people coming in the door to the community college have a high school diploma, but it doesn't reflect excellent academic preparation. we are set up to help people succeed in those situations. And we've done quite a bit of work. I know in other sessions, the Education Committee has heard about the move from remedial work to co-requisite work so that we're not losing people. I'm not proud to tell you that if we go back, 6 years and we look at students in remedial courses, that the pass rate out of remedial math and English into college level courses was about 7 or 8%. That actually was about the national average. And having switched to a co-requisite model, we're seeing a much, much higher level of success of people who come in with inadequate preparation. I've seen situations where someone has come in the door and wants to be a nurse and starts off in remedial courses and has to move all the way through. Well, what's going to happen if this person has applied for admissions in nursing? How are you going to make the decision about whether this individual, who clearly is not prepared at this moment, has that opportunity? Nursing and healthcare are one of the few places where the community college actually has selective admissions. But I worry about things like a student applies to be in a nursing program. Who's going to make the decision as to whether they go into a community college-based ASN program or they go into a 4-year program? How is it that you're going to preserve the options for students so that they can, in fact, move through? Another example, we have a co-location situation between Keene State College and River Valley. We have had situations come up because, for example, the college made the decision that they're going to do their COVID testing on Friday afternoons. That's perfectly reasonable for them. It's not reasonable for the community college nursing students because they work. And so their ability to attend classes was affected, because if you have to be at work Friday at noontime and you can't have the test that needs to allow you to be on campus, how do you do that? Now, the situation's been worked out. And again, I raise it not criticizing, but pointing out that there are distinct needs between what community college students or people who elect to begin at a community college versus a 4-year. I would also go on to talk a little bit more about transfer. So many of the stories that you hear about, I'll call them transfer disasters, are in fact not transfer disasters. So we often hear the story of, this student took a math class and it was adequate for the associate degree. And then when that individual transferred to a 4-year program, that math course wasn't counted, or if it was counted, it was kind of meaningless elective credit, meaning that this individual, when he or she completed their bachelor's degree, was going to graduate with 140 or 150 credits. It was entirely appropriate in my example for the 4-year college to say that's not the right math course. If somebody starts off in liberal arts and decides that they want to go into engineering, that math class, which may be affectionately described as math for poets, is not the right math course. And so for the university system to not accept it in that way is perfectly reasonable, but it's a complicated explanation. Now, there's been work done, and I will specifically cite the work that was done between the University of New Hampshire and the community college system, sponsored by the Mellon Foundation, which has resulted in 22 strong articulation agreements. And the way that those articulations came about was the work of a particular professor from the community college system with the university, Leslie Barber. Leslie then, once she understood what the particular course or degree was at the university system, organized the community college system. And now, no matter which of the community college system, no matter which community college you're at, if you follow the prescribed pathway, your entry to the university system is assured. It's one way we can do business. There are other ways that we can do business with all of our four-year partners. I'm going to talk also about IT systems. I mentioned that we are using Banner. The the university system is using several different programs. There's going to have to be a lot of work over time putting all of those together. So again, what is the plan? How do we go forward? Representative Moffett brought up that the community college faculty and staff are members of the New Hampshire retirement system. We wouldn't describe ourselves now, Representative Moffett, as state employees, but we're certainly tied to some of the state systems. Those will have to be worked out. We have at least 11 unions among the group of us. What's going to happen there? And I will say that this is a great concern on the part of our faculty and staff at this moment. Risk management. We have so many areas. Intellectual property, what we do in that area, what the university system does, very different, because how our faculty are identified and treated is very different in the systems. Debt and reserves and marketing and fundraising, all of these things will have to be figured out. And I do hope that as our legislature, looking at what happens to benefit our residents, that you will think in terms of what you can do to preserve the missions of the two entities. I appreciated what Dr. Burks said about the regional needs. That is a key here, because the one thing I've learned living in New Hampshire is that our regions are quite distinctive. And right now the community colleges are present. But what can you do to preserve the regional needs so that we are addressing the needs of not only business, but also of our residents? So I will stop there and let you go forward with questions. But I wanted to point out to you several of the areas that I wanted you to take into consideration as you look at what is the best way to bring the systems together. I think bringing the systems together makes sense, but how it is you do that and what it is you think about is very important. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hewitt. Are there questions for the community college system? Yes, Representative Luno.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, and thanks, Susan, for joining us this morning. In my experience in private industry, I've spent a lot of time writing business plans, and I was wondering if you're aware of any examples of system, in considering systems merging, if states have taken it upon to essentially start with a business plan type of approach on that, and are there any examples where after the business plan was developed, and it may have taken quite a while to develop such plans, that after the plan was written, it was sort of determined that that maybe it doesn't move forward?
I'm not aware of that happening. I think that many states find themselves in the situation that we're in as we look at declining high school enrollments and what the potential impact could be. I guess what I would say is the plans that have led to effective reorganizations have primarily been between smaller entities. And I'll talk about the University of Maine and the work that they're doing. They've been moving towards unifying into one accreditation, if you will, for a number of years, but they've done it, one college site like Machias to another one of their locations. So to me, the best examples are places where we've had entities unite, one college to one college or several colleges together, rather than starting to put the systems together. Like I look at Wisconsin, which brought a number of its systems together and is now in the process of trying to figure out how to sort of straighten out things that happened unexpectedly from the merger that they need to look at. Minnesota is another example. I spoke to the gentleman who was the Speaker of the House and the head of the Minnesota system, and they talked about the fact that it's taken quite a number of years to recognize the regional value of the community colleges and to go back to that. So I'm not aware of a plan being put in place and then people looking at it and saying, nope, we shouldn't go forward and do this. And I think it's probably how urgent folks thought the situation was. But I'm keenly aware of the negative impact on community colleges when this goes forward too quickly. And the things that make community colleges are lost.
Great. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I got one comment here. You recently, through the community college, had a report put together by the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems. And one of the cases they looked at was Connecticut. And you've indicated earlier here that you have had familiarity with that system down there. Did they have, when they went into a merger process, was there any timeframes which you see them transitioning and moving forward, similar to what Vermont did with their bridge year? What are we looking at in terms of time frame for the community college system?
In Connecticut or in Vermont?
Well, I'm not really familiar with Connecticut. I'm somewhat familiar with what happened over with Linden and all those over in Vermont with the bridge year. And was there any support? In other words, did they plan on doing this all in 1 year, or was it phased in by elements?
Okay. In Connecticut, the original plan was like a 5-year plan. And they've obviously tremendously exceeded that. There was a plan to look at the community colleges first and to make decisions about them, and then to move on to the CSUs, the Connecticut State Universities. But that, again, they're far outside of their plan. Connecticut is the Connecticut system is a heavily unionized system. There's an organization called CBAC, which is a state employees bargaining coalition. And so I would say that because the plan didn't begin with conversations with all of the stakeholders, that they ended up with significant opposition, which continues to this day. And so again, as a plan is being formulated, I would suggest that the various stakeholders be included in the planning process. There was an attempt at one point to do that, but because the plan had been set forward as, this is going to be our timeline, this is what we're going to accomplish, wasn't able to be accomplished because the opposition rose up fiercely and early.
Thank you very much. I think one last from Representative Myler, and then we're going to move into Catherine Provencher and Joe Moran. Go ahead, Mel. Are you got to unmute yourself, Mel.
Thank you, Rick. Susan, one of the things that's become clear in the people that we've been talking with is a concern of the timing of trying to put this together. The governor made the announcement at the budget meeting. There's some questions about whether that's the appropriate procedure to do it through the budget. an outside person. The point is, we've been hearing from people that say that it's going to take time. The dilemma that we have right now is that both systems are looking for a chancellor. And so this uncertainty of where we are comes into that conversation. And I'm going to ask the same question of the university system. If we sure decide to go ahead with this system, could each of these systems place their search on hold until we figure out exactly where we're going to go with this? Because it would seem to me it's going to be difficult to hire somebody into a chancellor position with the unknown factor of exactly where we are going with this. So the question to you, Susan, is would the CCSNH system, if we're going to go forward with this plan, put their search on hold? Now, I know that puts you in a compromising position because of July, you're supposed to be retired again. But from a theoretical standpoint,
Mhm.
is that something that you think that the system would place on hold?
I actually don't have to be theoretical about this, Representative Myler. We had a meeting yesterday of our board, and we're going ahead with our chancellor search and offering the 2-year contract, because in reading the language as it exists in the bill, the new entity, the new system would be created July 2023. We had, as you know, begun a search for a chancellor in the fall, and we have approximately 70 applications. We're working with a search firm. And so what our initial thought was that we would have to continue with an interim chancellor, because the way that we're organized is as a system, and we need a CEO given how our system operates. We were going to cancel the search, and we talked with the principal of the search firm, and he said, people are not frightened by this. We've been keeping them informed all the way through about what the status of the system is. And in fact, there are quite a number of people who are applicants who see this as an exciting opportunity, and that a 2-year window to work on the creation of this, or the, whatever is going to happen, is not daunting. So yesterday, our board voted, and we've let the governor's office know, on going forward with our search and bringing somebody in this summer to be the chancellor, with the clear understanding that this is a 2-year contract, and we are not making any promises about anything going forward.
Thank you very much. That's very clear.
Joe, I see you just put your hand up.
Just wanted to respond to this particular question.
Okay.
If you place yourselves in the seat of the future board as it's going through this transitional period, especially, it would be enormously helpful for that board if CCSNH had a chancellor. And if unfortunately it isn't going to be Susan, having somebody in place will make what's going to be a very challenging task more manageable than if immediately the new board is going to have 7 CCSNH institutions and 4 USNH institutions reporting in. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in what Susan is describing, the CCSNH board has decided on.
Thank you.
I should clarify what I said. I had said the board, it's the executive committee who has made this decision.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hewitt. With that, I think we're going to transition now. And I don't know protocol here, whether I introduce the chancellor first or the chair of the trustees. Organizational structure here.
I'll make it easy for you, Representative Ladd. You go with the board chair first.
Go for it, Joe.
Okay, thank you. We're going to run through some slides, and I understand our charge, it is to try to give you a very specific sense of why we feel, our board feels so much urgency about the challenges facing higher ed, and why we very quickly and unanimously voted in support of the governor's proposal. Let me just give you a word about background. For my own background, I was CEO of Albany International for 12 years. I was responsible for bringing the company, as a public company, bringing the company's headquarters here to New Hampshire and starting up that big operation in Rochester, that big aerospace operation. Before that, I was president of Bentley University, and before that, dean and a professor of business strategy at RPI. And prior to that, I spent my career, starting part of a career in GE and working President Reagan Science for President Reagan's Science Advisor. I've spent my whole career really bouncing back and forth between business and university and always working that interface. And so the reason I joined the board was because when I was trying to get that plant in Rochester started up and we needed to recruit 500 people, I spent my entire life struggling with the problem of finding enough talent to get this thing going here in New Hampshire. Spent a lot of time working with Great Bay. We set up a training program for associates who'd be ready for the factory floor. Spent a lot of time with UNH working on trying to find engineers and scientists for R&D. We spent a ton of time trying to find bachelors and masters of industrial engineering who could play the supervisory role in laying out and leading those plants. And they were great partners. But by and large, we had to go outside for a ton of the new talent because it just wasn't available within state. And it cost us a lot. We actually decided in the end not to bring over our finance and accounting group. It was 50 really good paying jobs that we left back in Albany because there just wasn't the talent available here. And it wasn't because public higher ed wasn't a great partner, both Great and UNH. It's just the talent wasn't there, wasn't enough of it. And so when the governor gave me the opportunity to join the board, I jumped at it because I thought here was a chance to, from the inside, actively work the problem of trying to promote the pathways between public higher ed and states' employers who are trying to create the kinds of new jobs that really make a difference in the state, higher value jobs. And so if I sound a little passionate what I'm about to tell you, it's because of that experience. The punchline of what I'm about to say is this: higher ed is facing an existential threat, and that threat is accelerating. We're just at the front end of it, and it's already daunting. We are out of time, as Dr. Birx described earlier. If we had started this 5 years ago, which is when Ross Gattell started warning us about what was coming, if we had started then to plan, we'd be in much better shape right now, but that time is done. We're out of time, and you'll see that as you look at the numbers, particularly as you look at the financials. Yes, there is a ton of planning that's required, a ton, and I think Susan gave you a great sense of just the long list of challenges that are going to have to be navigated to try to do this right. But the question is not, should there be planning, but rather who should be doing the planning? And what in my experience across multiple sectors, from what I've seen in other states in higher ed, when it works best, and I think Don mentioned this with Pennsylvania, when it works best, the people doing the planning are the people responsible for the managing and the implementation. You got to think about this as taking a 30-foot sailboat and trying to chart your way from Honolulu to San Francisco through a series of monsoons. And yes, you got to have the long-term plan, but you got to manage your way through the monsoons or you never get there. And you're constantly adjusting your short-term plans because of the monsoon, and adjusting the long-term plan because of how you have to deal with the monsoon, the short term. So having the right board in place that then has the task, that hires the right CEO, and that then has the task of charting through both short-term and long-term is the right way to get on with this, particularly if you're in crisis. And we're in crisis. And so that's why, and we have an acute sense of it on our board. And that's why we came out so quickly and forcefully in favor of the governor's proposal to put together a board representative of the two systems, get them to hire a CEO, and then get on with this task. And as he, in his words, and if you don't, you're going to get crushed. I think that's also why the 4 commissioners serving on the 2 boards just forcefully endorsed the governor's plan. Same reason, there's a sense of, our hair's on fire. We got to get on with this. Too late to talk. So that's the punchline. Let me back up here a bit, and Kathy and I are just going to walk you through some slides that give you some concrete data, and it's the same data we're looking at as a board. And honestly, every other good board and leadership system leadership group in the country is looking at the same time and struggling with. So the starting point for this whole conversation is the demographic challenge facing higher ed. And if you look at the upper left-hand curve, look at the purple line, which is the bottom line. That's Northeast United States. That's the pool of college age, higher ed age students or people available for higher ed over the next 25 years, over the next 20 years. And you can see that purple line is us. And so there's been a dip, and this is all calibrated to 2018. So 2018 is 100%. So you can see there's a drop right away from 2018 to 2020. Then there's a little bit of breathing space, and then whoa, the thing drops through the floor and never recovers. That's 100% predictable because it's just based on the number of people who've been born. There's no uncertainty about that. Now, just a few points to highlight here. First, higher ed has been in growth mode since the GI Bill immediately after World War II. With a couple of blips along the way, it has always been growing because through the baby boom and beyond, the number of people going to college had always been growing. This is unprecedented. This hasn't happened ever. And the scale involved here is very hard for people to get their heads around. You need to be thinking textile industry in New Hampshire or paper industry, decades ago, or think bricks and mortar retailing today. It's that kind of a magnitude of a change, and higher ed is not ready for it because everybody who's grown up in higher ed has been thinking grow, grow, grow. Second point, and this is one people in higher ed don't talk about. There is a food chain in higher ed. There are the elite schools, and even if you saw an article today in Wall Street Journal, elite schools are being buried with applications right now. Beneath the elite schools, there are the schools ranked 50th to 100. Then there are the regional colleges, the USNH institutions that are ranked below the 100th, and then there are the 2-year schools. The elites and the 50 to 100 are going to be fine through this. They're facing the same demographics. But all they need to do is, if they're having trouble filling their class, they just cherry pick down from students who in the past, to schools, pulling away students who in the past wouldn't have gotten into the elite. So if MIT and Harvard have a problem, which they won't, they'll just cherry pick from Tufts and BC. And Tufts and BC have a problem, they're just going to cherry pick Northeastern and UMass Amherst and UMass Lowell. And if those have a problem, they're just going to turn around and cherry pick UNH and Maine. And if UNH and Maine have a problem, they're going to cherry pick Keene and Plymouth. And Keene and Plymouth have a problem, they're going to cherry pick NHTI and Manchester. And the data says it's already happening. So the farther down the food chain you are, and public higher ed in New Hampshire is farther down the food chain, the harder the impact that this demographic is going to have. Now you can see on the lower right-hand side, the 2-year institutions across the country, and especially in the Northeast, are getting hit even harder. There isn't quite that flat curve through the first half of this decade, and it drops hard. Same trend, we're seeing it across the country, and we're seeing it in today's application trends, both in-state and across the Northeast. You should hear some of the stories from SUNY. Now, if you go one more slide, Kathy, New Hampshire is being hit especially hard. And I thought this was particularly interesting. These are slides from the audited financial statements of CCS&H in 2018. And this is what Ross was telling us back then, and we weren't listening hard enough. What he was arguing, and it's in the 2018 audited financial statement. What he said is, look, there are three drivers of enrollment for CCS&H, and he could have said for USNH as well. It's employment. It's, if the employment rate is very high, we have more trouble recruiting. Number two is the number of students graduating from New Hampshire high schools. And number three is competition from other institutions. So and that cannibalization process is just describing. So here is, in 2018, the forecast for the decline in the number of high school graduates in New Hampshire between 2018 and 2032. It's completely consistent with the demographic chart I just showed you. The bad news here is New Hampshire is getting hit even harder than the rest of New England. As you can see on the right-hand side, he was predicting basically a 26% decline in the number of high school graduates that would be available for all of us in public higher ed to recruit over the next 15 years. Now, the data in 2020 that just came out from the Chronicle, what it'll tell you is, looking out just 10 years, the state that is going to have it toughest is Connecticut. It's going to be down 17% number of high school graduates over the next 10 years. Number two in the country, New Hampshire, with a 15% decline. Maine is at 10%. Massachusetts is at 8% decline. Vermont's at 7% decline. We are getting clobbered. There's no hiding from it. This is like gravity. Now, I wish I could tell you that was the entirety of the problem. It's only half the problem. Kathy, if you look inside the shrinking pool of available students, what you see, and the data is overwhelming here, is it's a much poorer pool, and a shrinking pool of people who need greater financial aid. And that's because of the demographic composition. There are the number of minority families that higher ed is serving grows from about 29% of the total in 2000 to 45% by 2018. It's even higher now. The number of immigrant families, first generation immigrant families that higher ed is serving, was something like 20% of the total population in 2000. It's 28% of the total population in 2018, and that continues to grow too. So the net result is, as the number of students, and therefore the amount of tuition, is steadily declining with gravity, demographic gravity, the amount of financial aid that we have to pay to that shrinking pool is growing. So here you can see, this is just over a short period of time, the growth in financial aid that USNH has paid as a result of this change in the population. So you get a double whammy here. Net revenue, net tuition revenue, is being hit both by this waterfall of shrinking high school graduates and by the need for increasing financial aid to support those students. So if you go to the next curve, next slide.
Joe, if I could just make one
Sure,
more point.
thank
We project that blue line is going to continue to increase, but to Joe's point, remember, there's more aid being distributed to fewer students because the head count is on the decline, but the aid is on the increase. You'll see that in a minute in the next, right there.
Yeah, and the point you just can't emphasize enough, we're barely at the front end of this. That cliff hits in 2025, 2026, and it's a multi-year cliff. So if you look on the left-hand side of the curve, slide here, this is just the top curve, the blue curve is USNH's net tuition revenue. So leave aside room and board, leave aside contracts and grants. And so you can see that net revenue at the front end of this crisis is already shrinking by about 8% and close to $28 million in a very short period of time. Now, the next curve is, the red curve is state appropriation. And you can see that while our net revenue has come down by about 28 million, state appropriations have held steady, but then have happily increased a little bit, but you can see not nearly enough to offset the impact of the demographic declines. Now, the net result is the gray bars. We're seeing rapidly shrinking margins. When I first started on the board, we used to be accustomed to 3% operating margins. Because of this decline, even as we're holding the line on cost, you can see our margins begin to slip from 1.5% to 0.7% this year, fiscal year 21, if you exclude the effect of COVID. So we're looking at a negative 2%. Now, we've got a major restructuring plan to try to get us back to break even by next year. But keep in mind, these trends continue. So, we project out for 2022 and 23 further declines in net revenue. Kathy, what are we expecting in 22 and 23? It's probably
In total operating revenue, we're looking at a 9% decline from 20 to 23. 9% decline in operating revenue.
And again, this is just gravity. It's not, you can't pretend it's not happening, because it's happening. And that still leaves us well before we hit that demographic cliff. Now, we don't have as much access to as much data over on the CCS&H side, but if you look at the published data in the audited financials, you see exactly the same trend. So net tuition revenue, the blue line, a very short period of time, shrinks from $47.9 million to $39 million. And FY21, the audited FY20 audited statement said enrollment for FY21 is down another 11%. Happily for the state, for the well-being of the state, the legislature stepped up and has dramatically increased support for CCS&H, going from 43.8 million appropriations to 57 million appropriations. So in that case, the state has been able to offset the sharp decline due to demographics. But remember, we're at the front end of this, so that increase in state appropriation is going to have to continue at pretty much that pace in order to offset this tsunami that we're all being hit with. Now, I just want to make a few more points. If you go to the next slide, we're as a state heading into this storm in a position of disadvantage. We're in about as weak a position as a state as there is in the country. So, you start by looking at the number of high school graduates from the state that leave the state to go to school. And, from an employer's perspective, once they leave, it's that much harder and that much more expensive to get them back. So you look at students, high school students leaving to enroll in schools outside of New Hampshire, it's almost 60% of our high school graduates. And don't forget Ross's chart. We're talking about a rapidly shrinking pool of high school graduates. And if we continue to lose at that rate, this is going to get very hard. Even when you include two years, so students enrolling both in 2 and 4 year, we're still the number 2 exporter of high school students. Second point, Kathy, another background point, Kathy, if you move to the next slide. We're entering into this crisis as the second most expensive public higher education institute for in-state tuition in the country. So the right way to look at this curve is the blue lines. This is for 4-year tuition, 4-year schools. The blue bars represent in-state tuition. The orange bars represent out-of-state tuition. So you add them together to get total tuition. But what I want to draw your attention to is the blue curve. So this eye chart here, New Hampshire is the second from the right. So we're the second most expensive tuition for public higher education in the country. Now, if you go next slide, same is true for our 2 years. So what this is telling you is not just part of the explanation why so many of our high school students are leaving, but there is no way that public higher ed in this state can address this revenue crisis by increasing tuition. There's just no way. So, and if we tried, the market will just throw it right back at us because of the competitive factors. So we have to find a way of offsetting this rapidly shrinking net tuition revenue with, at best, holding tuition flat. Now, in truth, we ought to be cutting tuition precisely because it's so expensive. And if we're serious about reversing the trend of the loss of high school students, we better start by lowering tuition and making public higher ed in the state more affordable. It's going to be very, very hard to do that at a time when our net revenue is crashing on us. Now, on the other hand, if you were one of the schools off on the left-hand side of the curve, you can see, or even in the middle of the curve, you can see you've got room there to maybe increase tuition some and have students bear more of the cost as the revenue crisis hits. But there's just no way we have the ability to do that. Last slide, well, last background slide. Another reason that we're entering into this crisis in a position of disadvantage is we are overbuilt, relatively overbuilt for public higher education. So this chart just simply calculates the ratio of population to number of institutions in higher education. So Utah has, and if you look at the right-hand column, that's the population of people under 25. So Utah has the largest population being served by the smallest number of institutions. We're 41st on that curve. So we have, for a relatively small numerator population, a relatively large denominator, number of institutions, 11, that are serving public higher education. And you can look at the states that are rated lower than us, they tend to have a lot of dispersed geographical requirements. So we're exporting more than anybody. We're more expensive than just about everybody except for Vermont, and we're starting in an overbuilt position. That's not a great place to be to address what's going to be a really profound generational revenue crisis in higher education. Now, Kathy, if you go to the next slide, all of this, I know you know this, all of this is dramatically exacerbated and probably accelerated by the pandemic. So what the pandemic is doing is creating smaller enrollments of incoming students. It's creating weaker retention of existing students. And it means, because we've spread out our campuses, fewer students utilizing campus room and board, which is another source of revenue and therefore loss of revenue. At the same time, because of the economic impact, particularly on the poorest segments of society, which is what public higher education in general, and 2 years in particular, that's their mission to serve. They're the ones that are hardest hit by those students that 2 years in public higher ed are serving. They're the ones that are hardest hit by this pandemic. And then, of course, institutions are having to take on much higher costs, some of them offset by the government, just because of trying to preserve safety. So what's the short-term impact? Well, for USNH, the short-term impact for us is $136 million of COVID-related losses, offset by about $61 million of stimulus and Gopher funding. We'll get through it. And we think by careful cash management, we think we can get through without having to liquidate any of our endowment to cover losses. But there's a long-term impact on this as well. And the long-term impact is we're depleting our cash reserves. We have fewer, by the time we get through this, days cash on hand than we did before. The smaller classes during the pandemic, they become sophomores and juniors and seniors. And as their upperclassmen counterparts graduate, we're left with a fundamentally smaller pool of students that we're serving. The loss of family income during the pandemic, it takes time, as we learned in 2008, 2009, to rebuild that income, and that means more need for financial aid than we otherwise would have had. And so our fear is what happens here is the pandemic, at least for USNH, probably wipes out that flat period of the demographic curve where we were telling ourselves would have some breathing space for a few years before having to take on that demographic cliff.
And that, Joe, and that's why last spring, we had been planning for this, that the headwinds coming, but last spring, it took on a new sense of urgency, and this wholesale restructuring project to take 10% out of our cost structure by 2023 was absolutely necessary. And we have that roadmap, we're on that. The other follow-up to Joe's point, we're looking at probably $100 million of our cash being depleted over the course of the pandemic. We've had to pull back on all capital spending, and we had built up reserves. We pretty much take care of our own capital needs, and that will be effectively wiped out by the time we're to 2023 for good reason, but it's just the reality of where we are right now.
So last slide, which is the next, which really gets to what Kathy's just saying. Because of the long-term structural trends and the looming pandemic, we launched a significant restructuring plan that called for taking out 10% of costs on our campuses. And the goal really was to very overtly offset both the combination of these demographic trends and the pandemic. We were willing to suffer through significant losses during the pandemic in order to keep our people safe. But we had to do during the pandemic whatever it was going to take to get us back to break even by 22 and get us a small margin by 23. And so so we are right in the middle of a major restructuring program, which the basic approach is we're rolling back our expenses to fiscal year 2019. We're restructuring our benefits. We're doing a major consolidation of our back office administrative functions. There's significant rebalancing going on of our academic programs on each of the campuses. There are at least roughly 500 faculty and staff who are through a voluntary separation and retirement program who are leaving, who are choosing to retire. Unfortunately, there will be some involuntary separations as well, but we're talking a radical restructuring, which for us and for most other institutions is unprecedented in scope and scale. It's on schedule. You're not hearing much about it, which just gives you a sense of a shared understanding of the urgency that higher ed is facing across our system and campuses. You think about all of the visibility there was 3 years ago when UNH tried to reduce its workforce by 15 lecturers in modern languages, and the heat that CCSNH took by taking a very necessary step of reducing 10 of their people. We're talking north of 500 people, and it's so far on schedule. And most of those people are leaving voluntarily because of a package we'll put together for them. That's the good news. The bad news, if we do everything right and we get lucky with this year's incoming class, and I'm not sure we will get lucky, this only catches us up to those trends. This doesn't get us ahead, catches us up. It's taking out $70 million just to catch up to the decline in net revenues that are pretty much locked in already. And so the hard work is ahead of us. And now we know our brethren at CCSNH are going through the same thing, but it'll be worse for them just because of all of the things I've talked about. And so as we look at that as a board, that's why we say, look, we can do everything possible to optimize within the boundaries of USNH. But if we take if we put on our hats as fiduciaries for the state, clearly there are many more ways that you can move to optimally serve the citizens of the state if you take both systems together and try to optimize as one unified system. And Don gave you an example of how there's so much more that White Mountain and Plymouth could be doing if we didn't have the governance barriers that we do. Now, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very difficult, and it's going to be doing it through crisis constantly. But that's why we say start with a unified board. Start with a CEO type chancellor. Get everyone understanding the scale of the problem. And then let's work together to navigate through the many, many legitimate issues and questions that Susan and Don laid out. There is something very significant the legislature can do to help public higher ed get to a sustainable place. As I tell you right now, I'll speak for myself. I don't believe right now public higher education in New Hampshire is on a path to a sustainable future, to a financially viable future. I think it's on a path to a cliff. The best thing that the legislature could do to support public higher education during this crisis is to give public higher ed a cushion, to give this new board time to work through the many issues that it's going to have to address. If on day one, they're going to have to be dealing with budget cuts at the same time that they're going to have to navigate through the hangover of the pandemic and the continuing demographic trends, these are going to be really tough. So I'll stop there.
Well, I'll just add, not just the budget cuts. The community college system and university system put a joint fiscal note together for this section of House Bill 2 that this board is going to need some external support and the resources to bring in some external support to really think through, Representative Luno, the business plan, the workflows, the strategic vision, the timeline. So I wholeheartedly agree with Joe's statement. We've mentioned this to Division 2 and to the governor's office, that now's not the time to cut the appropriation when this hard work is ahead. And there's going to need to be some investment dollars to support the board.
I guess we can stop sharing, Kathy.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe and Catherine.
Representative, I've provided this slide deck to Jen,
Great.
so she can provide it to the committee members.
Yeah, Jen, would you please email that out to all committee members?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Are there questions for Dr. Moran and Catherine Preventure? I can remember, Joe, that my father used to work for Globe Albany, and that's not the same as Albany International, is it?
It's not.
No.
I think we talked about that once, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go on. Representative Moffat, do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. Real quick, for any of the panelists, the president and others who campaigned for president, I'm looking at some of the recent news items. The president campaigned on he has a plan to make community college and four-year public colleges free tuition for them. So he's new, his administration is new, but in terms of the president's plan to make tuition free for your organizations, is there anything that you see flowing from this that would be helpful?
Susan, you want me to take that or you want to take that?
Well, you can start and then I'll chime in.
Okay. I think we find it pretty scary. The prospect here is, I mean, this has to be thought through very carefully. If you have an increase in students without the resources to support them, it becomes the worst of unfunded mandates. If because they're not paying tuition, but you've got to support them. If the reimbursement for the students is linked to the national averages, we're going to get slammed. So in other words, if there's I mean, the goal is really worthy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you want to get to 65 by 25. This is the way to do it. And the first instinct is to stand up and cheer. But you've got to look at the details because it could really get us in trouble. Let's take, for example, this. Again, we're uniquely ill-positioned for this because of our high cost of tuition. So there's no way they're going to reward less efficient institutions by saying, well, New Hampshire, you charge $17,000 a year. You're going to be reimbursed $17,000 a year for the students that we're letting in. It's going to be, well, the national average is 5,000. Maybe we'll make a regional adjustment. That's what you're going to get for each student. So it doesn't solve the demographic problem. It may make our mismatch between revenue and costs a lot worse than it is if it's not done really carefully.
And I would comment that the free tuition plays out in different ways in different states, whether we're talking about the Kentucky Promise or the Tennessee program and so on. Oftentimes that program is aimed at full-time students who are recent high school graduates. That's not the population of our community colleges. Our 70-something% of our population is 22, 24 or older. Our average age is about 27. So the question for me would be how this is going to play out. I would say right now I'm more interested in the proposal to double the Pell allotment, that would continue to serve all of our students, because if you're a part-time student, your allotment would be adjusted, but it would still pay more than is currently being paid. One of the issues that our students might have if they were free tuition, it was a surprise to me, but if you want to go into automotive, for example, you have to buy your own tools. That's about $2,000. And we're fortunate to have the Medallion Fund under the Charitable Foundation, and many students benefit that way. But it is an answer of sorts. And of course, Dr. Jill Biden has been in community colleges forever. And so she really does understand the issue. It would be great to have the help. One of the slides that you saw before was produced by Ross Cattell, looking at the declining number of high school grads. He used that slide with our board to make the point that there are about 146,000 people in this state who have some degree of college credit. We should be doing more to go after and serve that population than we've been doing. And while I don't dispute the figures, I do see a different path forward for community colleges once we come through the pandemic. Nationally, nobody expected community colleges to suffer in the way that we have. We are absolutely on the average. And it really is because our students are either essential workers, whether they're LNAs or they're in retail, or their parents, and they haven't been able to balance things. The challenge for us at this moment is to help them figure out how they can come back. So long answer, I do hope for more money to be coming. I'm looking forward, for instance, to another round of tax grants to support our students. We are, and always have been, lean, but we are not fragile. We find ways to deal with what we have as a situation in front of us.
I just one little point here. I just read an article that 25% of the colleges are going to be out of business here in the next few years. But I'm looking at some figures. I can remember talking with Ross Cattell, and here's another article I've just read. Between 2001 and 2021, tuition for colleges rose 140%. Yet we still continue to have only about 62% of our folks that are attending college graduating in 6 years. So that's causing a real whammy in terms of the cost of education for these kids. Is there anything we're doing to increase the number, our percentage for kids that can graduate in 6 years from the 62% level. And this is a national level. So I don't know exactly what it may be for the University of New Hampshire or Keene or Plymouth. Can somebody help me out in that?
Actually, Representative Ladd, we have the highest graduation rate, the New Hampshire public 4 years do than any other state in New England. We publish a dashboard. I can get that to Jen. It has a number of different metrics, but we're well above the national average here in New Hampshire publics for that 6-year graduation rate.
But has our tuition rate also increased at that 140% over the last 10 year,
Well,
20
if
years?
if depends on the time frame, Representative Ladd. If you look through the time that the good old days, when you just heard from Ed McKay during Ed McKay's time. You just read a letter from former trustees who used to be on the board back in those days. Yeah, you'd see increases 3%, 4%, 5%. And then when the state cut its allocation dramatically, there were some big increases in tuition. We've fought hard to hold the line on tuition for the very reason you described for, I think, the last 4 years. And in our current budget proposal, we said we would actually drop tuition if we get an increase in state support. We would use the entire increase in support to drop tuition. I know CCSNH has done a great job holding the line on tuition. We're still too high. And so part of the crisis here is we've got to find a way of lowering the cost of attendance. And it's tough to do when your revenue is shrinking so fast, but that's what the goal needs to be. As for the second part of your question, what are we doing to improve graduation rate? I want to defer to Susan and Don. Don's got a lot to say on this subject, and I know Susan does too, so I'll stop.
Thank you. I don't know if we have to have that answered at this moment, but that would be a concern. I would like to offer the opportunity to others on the committee to ask questions. At Representative Luno.
Thanks very much, Rick, and thanks, Catherine and Joe, for joining us this morning. So, I've had the honor to serve on boards both at UNH Engineering Technology Program and the NHTI Advisory Board. And one of the things that came up at a recent advisory board meeting back in February was when President Mullen-Savitsky discussed the NHTI strategic plan. And she laid out 4 specific points to it. The first one was retention. The second one was workforce development. The third was effectiveness and sustainability. And the fourth was diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I wanted to poke specifically on the workforce development one, because one of the findings they had and that they built into their plan was reflected the fact that 65% of their students want credentials as opposed to necessarily 2-year degrees or 4-year degrees. And so that pivot being something that the community colleges can address on rapidly short order, I think is a very good opportunity for our community colleges. I was wondering, given the precipitous decline in high school graduates projected over the next few years, what is the university system seeing in terms of what you've got the restructuring plan and everything, but what do your students want?
Well, it's a deep question, and there's so many layers to it. And again, I'll defer to Don for part of the answer. But the starting point for us is 80% of the population that higher education in this country is serving, and that number is going to grow, are non-traditional students. And so, the kind of students that in the past would normally have been the province of community colleges have become the province of all of higher ed. And the emergence of distance learning as a dominant modality makes the concept of education as a lifelong process being attained through longer periods of time in chunks, only some of which are traditional diplomas, has become sort of the common expectation across higher education. And so, if you look at UNH, it's putting a lot of emphasis, and look at where its growth is. It's in professional post-baccalaureate programs. And it's going in some cases in traditional format, and both physically and in degree, in some cases far less traditional, both in format and in whether it's a credential or even a certificate, even something less than a credential, a badge. I just got off a Zoom call with a major, a very well-known, I won't mention the name, private institution in Boston. And we were doing a brainstorming session on precisely that question, is how do they take advantage of their reputation in a particular field where they're really strong, and use it to do everything from post-baccalaureate summer programs to credentials to badges to lifelong coming back and forth every once in a while to distance degrees spread out over a period of time to distance one-year programs. It's become the norm to work through. I would say that we in New Hampshire are late to the game, but you can't expect to navigate through the changes without getting there.
I would add, Representative Luno, this is an example where under one governance structure, we may be able to facilitate rather than compete. So we should, if the community college system is really good at credentialing a certain population of grant staters, the university system should not be competing, and vice versa.
I'll just give you a quick example of what we've done in the last year. Actually, the last 6 months is start a cybersecurity credential and also a credential in innovation and entrepreneurship, which gives a student all the background experience they need, whatever their area of interest is in business, that gives them the capability to really run the business. So those are two that we just did.
But part of why that question is so deep is it's a totally different business model, and the revenue that you extract from, if you're thinking again about this revenue crisis and how you manage institutions, you get far less revenue from those kind of programs than you did by having 18 to 20-year-olds crowded together in a physical location, paying for room and board. And so that's part of the reason this is such a tsunami that you've got to navigate your way through, is you can get to that other population, but you've got to do it in a way that maintains the financial viability of your institutions. That's the hard part.
Right. No, I appreciate that very much, Joe, and certainly, the differences between the university system colleges and the community colleges. I mean, you just mentioned room and board. I think NHTI, that's where my familiarity is, has a pretty lively, and robust dining services and students on campus. I think they have a small number of students that live on campus. I think they're an outlier in most of the community colleges are not residential institutions, but they do, have the ability to make up revenue through volume. And
over there, not over here.
So that's I think that's an area that that the community colleges, I think, have a tremendous opportunity. And I guess I'd hope that we're able to learn more about what the university system's sort of strategic, pivot is going to be, given that particularly the available market through the non-traditional students.
I have a question for Joe or Don or Susan or Catherine. When I'm looking at HB2 in front of me right now, we're dealing with governance. We're dealing with the makeup of our structure and our organization. Is there any kind of, has there been any thinking on the part of the University of Community College system in terms of timelines in which we're going to be able to achieve all these other policy issues that come along with a change of our governance, and so that the system can work and be more affordable, so it can be more accessible, so it can meet the challenges of our workforce demands here in the state. So what kind of timeline are you looking at? I've heard Susan Hewitt talk about 5 years for the community college system down in Connecticut, and they may have to extend that. What are we looking at in terms of this? And are we doing this in isolation and not working? New England is a very small region. It's the size of many states in other locations in our country. And so we're competing with, for example, here I hear Don Burke saying, well, we're introducing cybersecurity. Well, the University of Maine, Southern Maine, and Gorham just introduced the same program. Are we going to have to start looking beyond our borders? Several questions in there.
Susan, you want to go first?
No.
Sorry. The timeline, the way we think of the timeline is as follows. Remember, we're doing all this in crisis. The most important 2 steps are for each board to intelligently pick the 5 most qualified representatives to serve on that new board. And there's an equal burden on the governor to pick, one hopes from the existing boards, 5 really strong people. And then they immediately need to get on with the task of selecting a chancellor as quickly as possible. And that person, back to Representative Myler's question, in crisis, given the scale of what we got to go through, it needs to be a CEO. Now, then they will immediately assign their legal representative, legal counsel, to put together a draft of the enabling legislation for the system. While the board gets on to, it's not a 1-year task, it's not a 3-year task, it's not a 5-year task, it's a forever task. The process of managing through an unprecedented time of change and challenge while preserving the higher ed missions of the 2-year, 4-year, and graduate programs. And some of it will be immediately obvious. You don't need 2 system offices. You don't need 2 procurement shops. You don't need 2 IT systems. Some of it is going to be bubble up immediately. I would think Don and his counterpart at White Mountain are going to be working on how they can coordinate their region without any urging from the board. Some of it is going to take years and may never be worth it. For example, single accreditation, it may be that maybe in the North Country, you gradually create one unified faculty to serve that region, but in other places it's a totally different faculty and a totally different accreditation. You don't decide that in advance, you decide that as you go. You begin to understand, partially based on the financial pressures, what you need to do and how quickly you need to do it. People on the board must be deeply committed to the mission of public higher education for all the citizens of the state, because they always have to put that first. So what do you do to preserve the mission while achieving financial viability? And then the sequence of steps become apparent as you use those as a guidepost. But If you don't have the right board, you don't have the right chancellor, since you don't have time, everybody's in real trouble. So I think this is the right approach. We just have to execute it right. And I'll repeat the same point. The best thing the legislature could do for the citizens of New Hampshire with respect to public higher ed is give this new group a financial cushion rather than put them in a position of having to figure out how they're going to cut $4 million from the combined budget in year 2.
And we've kind of tabled out what the bill calls for. And so the new board wouldn't be seated until like the end of August. They've got 60 days to be constituted. And then by January 1, they're supposed to have delivered information about what the new, what the new entity is and what the new statute looks like. If they're going to also undertake a search for a chancellor, that's a year-long process. And so as you begin to look at it, you've got lots of things going on at the same time. And we don't have what to me is the absolute first thing, which is what is the mission?
Right.
So we need the mission first. We've got this statute that needs to be developed, and we've got a chancellor or some sort of chief executive to look for, all in a very, very short period of time. Conceptually, the need to further integrate our two entities, it's going to take time and money. There are some initial steps. I think some of what Don has laid out makes sense. I also appreciate Joe acknowledging the regional nature of New Hampshire. And so we may, 5 years down the road, get to a new place. In fact, Representative Ladd, the community colleges still have not been integrated. So they started the work in Connecticut. They started the work in 2011. Their very first attempt at getting initial candidacy from NECHI is scheduled for 2023. And they are still a heck of a long way away from that at this moment. So there are partnerships and teams that can be created. I appreciate hearing about Plymouth State, and I have to say it's White Mountains with an S because of where they are. They're in 3 different locations there. And I do agree that the North Country needs that. Western New Hampshire needs something too. We look at the high school graduation rates. We look at what's happening to students coming out of the school systems there. They're not matching in many cases the college going rate of other parts of our state. And so again, the regional nature and what Portsmouth needs, very, very different from what Newport, for instance, needs, or the southern tier. Lots of really good questions. And there's a timeline here, but a little bit of planning, truly a lot of planning. One of the things I've said to a previous committee is you're bringing together 2 huge entities, yet there's nothing in HB2 that says, let's give them some funding. There was $1 million that was devoted to the reorganization that BEA is undertaking for the regional economic development areas. There's $1.4 million that was spent on DHHS. We are the future of our state. We are going to need a financial commitment in order to move forward with any kind of reorganization.
Sorry. You're muted, Representative Ladd.
Go ahead, Catherine.
I was just going to say, so House Bill 2 creates one board to oversee 2 systems until such time as legislation comes back for deliberation and passage. House Bill 2 doesn't in and of itself make one system. It creates one board to oversee I think the vision of House Bill 2 is there will be one integrated system, but House Bill 2 in and of itself doesn't get us there.
That first step.
That's right. That's right.
Yep. Representative Myler.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you for this very sobering analysis. I mean, I knew about this, but not in the detail that you provided. And I really am very appreciative of this. I don't know whether or not there needs to be a single board governing these two systems. But what is very clear, there needs to be somebody that's going to begin to look at what is the mission of higher education in this state. And whether it comes up with one board governing all that, that may be the result of it. But everybody here, all the presenters have all talked about what's the mission? What's the mission of higher education? As we deal with the multiple types of students, and David brings up the whole issue of the different types of education, the different types of credentialing. We're beginning to look at a whole different way of what's needed out there. And the bottom line for me is, how's it going to impact the workforce in this state and the economy in this state? So for me, as I look at this, and again, I'm still stunned by the information that you've given. I'm really very appreciative of that. Is that what the board needs to do is not look at how these things are going to be combined, whether it's even relevant to be combined. But the question is how are we going to meet the needs of the diverse population here of students? And if the result of that review is one board, one system, so be it. But I think that is down the road from the initial look of what do we need? What is and I'm coming back to the mission again, because it is the mission that drives the conversation of where we want to go. And that is not, that developing of that mission, believe me, I know, because I've done mission statements before, is not an easy task. And it does take time, and you're right. It needs to be funded. And if we think in this state we're going to have this conversation without some kind of funding to help bring in the respective resources, we found that in the study for the Commission on Student Funding. You need somebody from the outside that can come in and help us have that conversation, that has had these experiences. Now, granted, those of you that presented today have a great sense of experience, and I really appreciate from what you bring to the table here. But we need to have that conversation in a way that is beyond one system or no system, multiple systems. We need to figure out what we want in higher education. And that's what I'm taking away from this conversation today. And I'm so appreciative of the data you shared today. It's very sobering. Thank you.
Representative Joe, is that your hand up?
Yeah, you know, I violently agree with what you're saying, Representative Myler, but there's a but, and the but is there is no tomorrow if we don't start taking. Nobody wants to say this. I'm just going to say it. I don't have a dog in this hunt. I'm not an alumnus. I don't have a member of the family who's an alumnus of any of the institutions. These institutions are going to start to fail financially. Unless the legislature is willing to put tens of millions of more dollars in, we're on the cusp of several failures. And so it is our duty collectively as citizens of the state to preserve the financial well-being of public higher education in New Hampshire. We got too much cost spread out over too many institutions. So unless we're willing to say, create a board you have faith in to manage through the financial crisis, and while you're doing that, then take on the very worthy questions that you're raising. And you're going to need outside help, absolutely. But you've got to buy it some breathing space. I mean, you need to put the fire out in the house before you can redesign the kitchen. And we got to do both. You know, if we had listened to Ross in 2018, we'd be able to have the conversation you're suggesting we have before we move to something else. We didn't. Well, some of you did.
Yeah, some did, Joe, and I can remember Sean Jasper. yelling the same thing. And Ross was very active in trying to make us aware of what we were headed into. And yes, we're there now. And
Yeah.
I don't want to see that 25% that's going to be eliminated occurring here in this state. So what we need to do is we need to move forward. And I hear that from everybody that's spoken today, that we don't have any time. That time is not on our side. So are there further questions? Because I know we've gone beyond our noon hour. I can see Catherine being very hungry there and ready to go for lunch. Nobody else with any questions? I really want to thank our panel today. It's been enlightening. It really has been to hear the various angles from our practitioners in the school and those that are on the various boards here. It's enlightening, and it's a little bit scary that we are at this position, and we're gonna have to do something here. So I appreciate it on behalf of the subcommittee. Thank you very much today. And if no other comments, I will call this meeting adjourned, and we will continue to work again. The next meeting we have is on Friday. We're dealing with Barbara Brittenham, dealing with accreditation. And that's an issue that, you know, is a resultant of the need to first look at the governance here. And I'll tell you right now, I'm a strong believer that any organization needs somebody at the helm that's going to steer the ship and make those ultimately, you know, the buck stops here. So.
Hey,
attitude.
Rick.
Yep.
Rick?
Yes, you have a hand up?
Quick question for you though. Just process going forward. What are we looking to produce for a deliverable and when?
Yeah, well, you know, we've been asked, believe it or not, of course, I've told you before that we had basically about a week and a half, 2 weeks here for this whole committee or subcommittee work. We have to have a report to Division 2 Finance by next week. So we're talking about on Friday, we're going to have Barbara Brittenham come in, and then we're going to have to use the latter part of that time and probably extend it even a little bit into the afternoon to come up with our findings, our facts. We're not going to be taking any specific action. We're going to be just providing those policy statements and that information and what's needed by Karen Umberger to make that finance decision, to react to HB2. As they have to act on that HB2 bill shortly thereafter.
Rick,
So-
if we have to go into the afternoon, I'm prepared to spend more time than just the morning shot here.
Oh, I thoroughly expect that to happen, Mel.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, because
This will definitely happen. This is a huge topic, and there's so many issues from the governance side right down through all the policy considerations, and it's huge. And it's hard to believe that we have to try to get that done within a week and a half here.
exactly.
So given that, Rick, is Jen helping us out with putting together
Yeah.
draft findings and stuff like that?
Well, she's agreed to work with us and support us in any way that we need.
Good.
And
thank
so, yes, she has the information that, for example, the slideshow that was shown by Joe today, she has that will be delivered to you. I would suggest that folks read those materials that have been provided to us up to this point, become familiar with HB2, so that when we do meet later on Friday at 10 o'clock, that it most likely I could see this thing going to 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Easy.
Quite easly. We've done that. It's not a happy thing sitting in the same chair for that long. So that's where we are. I want to again thank you to our presenters today. You really opened, I think, our eyes to what we have a real significant issue in New Hampshire as well as the nation does. So let's tackle it and move forward. Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks,
for the
Rick.
invite. Good to
Yeah.
see you
Right.
all.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Thank you.